Traditional financial regulation relies on fitting assets into neat, predictable boxes. An asset is either a security, a commodity, or a currency. But decentralized algorithmic digital assets are fluid. They resist these classifications, bypassing traditional checkpoints and leaving regulators struggling to apply outdated rules to new technology. In most jurisdictions, the response to this fluidity has been reactive and fragmented. Authorities rely on enforcement actions or patchwork guidelines, creating an environment of severe institutional uncertainty where market participants operate without clear legal boundaries. Dubai took a structural approach. Rather than retrofitting old financial doctrines, the Emirate enacted Law No. 4 of 2022. This legislation built a dedicated, centralized framework from the ground up, specifically engineered for the digital asset ecosystem. That law established the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, or VARA. Its structural linkage to the Dubai World Trade Center Authority positions digital asset oversight as a strategic instrument of the Emirates' economic agenda. VARA exercises jurisdiction across the entire Emirate, covering the mainland and free zones. There is one specific carve-out, the Dubai International Financial Center, or DFIC. The DFIC maintains its own parallel regulatory ecosystem, establishing a dual regulatory architecture within the UAE. By pulling all other operations under a single specialized institution, Dubai eliminated local regulatory arbitrage. If a firm engages in virtual asset activities outside the DFIC, it answers to VARA. The standard regulatory trap involves trying to define the technical architecture of a hybrid digital token first, and then forcing rules onto that definition. If the token evolves, the rules break. VARA bypasses this trap by ignoring the technical design of the asset. Instead, it regulates the economic substance of the activity being performed. The framework routes the focus away from what the software is and toward what the business actually does with it. This approach captures operational risk exactly where it materializes. The threat to market stability does not live in the blockchain code, it lives at the interaction points. Whether holding client funds in a custody vault or executing trades on an exchange, VARA targets its oversight directly at those operational bottlenecks. Because the framework regulates human and corporate behavior instead of transient software architecture, the rules don't become obsolete when a new token standard is invented. It is dynamically future-proofed. To determine exactly who falls inside this regulatory perimeter, VARA applies a specific gateway threshold known as the Byway of Business Test. This test relies on both quantitative and qualitative factors. Regulators weigh the scale of the operations, the regularity of the activity, and the clear presence of commercial intent, such as charging commissions or fees. This metric prevents firms from dodging oversight through clever corporate structuring or informal operations. If the economic substance of the activity looks and acts like a business, VARA claims jurisdiction, regardless of whether the actor is registered or decentralized. There is also a direct behavioral trigger, holding out to the public. If an entity launches a marketing campaign or maintains an accessible trading platform, that public signaling automatically initiates regulatory oversight. Exemptions exist, but they are narrow and conditional. A practicing lawyer or accountant might handle digital assets incidentally, as part of their primary professional duties. However, if that activity expands into a standalone service, they lose their exempt status and require a license. Under this framework, participation in Dubai's virtual asset market is a regulated privilege, strictly dependent on maintaining measurable economic substance. Once an entity crosses into the regulatory perimeter, VARA exercises continuous, discretionary power over the assets they handle. The authority dynamically classifies tokens into functional typologies: payment, utility, or investment. When faced with a hybrid asset that blends multiple functions, VARA dissects its underlying economic purpose. The regulator then assigns compliance requirements based on the highest risk vector that specific token introduces to the market. This brings us to the strict limits of VARA's technological neutrality. The jurisdiction encourages financial innovation, but that innovation cannot supersede the regulator's ability to audit the system. The VARA framework is structurally integrated with UAE federal anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws. It aligns directly with the international standards defined by the Financial Action Task Force. Because of this strict alignment, Anonymity-enhanced cryptocurrencies, often known as privacy coins, are absolutely prohibited within the emirate. Their core design obscures transaction histories, making them incompatible with federal traceability requirements. To maintain this level of transparency, licensed entities must execute rigorous customer due diligence. Strict know-your-customer processes are mandatory to ensure that the identity behind every transaction is known. Under VARA, ultimate traceability is a non-negotiable prerequisite. Any token design or operational platform that breaks the chain of custody is excluded from legal market participation. Achieving compliance under VARA is not a single binary event. The licensing process requires navigating a modular, multi-layered matrix of obligations. Every licensed entity starts at the foundation. They are required to implement 4 core rulebooks covering internal governance, compliance and risk management, technology, and market conduct. On top of that foundation, VARA applies activity-specific rulebooks. These dictate the precise operational standards for the exact services an entity provides, whether that involves advisory, custody, exchange, or lending. This matrix structure actively prevents scope creep. An entity approved to provide basic advisory services cannot pivot into holding client funds in custody without applying for a new, specific approval for that vertical pillar. Because the obligations are modular, supervisory fees and capital requirements scale proportionally with the complexity of an entity's customized matrix. This matrix design allows VARA to apply precise, risk-calibrated friction to systemic players like major exchanges, while keeping entry barriers manageable for simpler operations. Securing a license under this matrix is the starting line. The compliance obligations are continuous and heavily monitored. Entities must operate real-time transaction monitoring systems. They must actively detect market manipulation, isolating anomalies like wash trading or spoofing exactly as they occur. When suspicious activity is flagged, the firm faces a strict dual reporting requirement. They must immediately transmit that intelligence to both VARA and the UAE Financial Intelligence Unit. To ensure these internal controls are actually functioning, VARA wields aggressive investigative authorities. Regulators can demand real-time access to a provider's internal electronic systems, databases, and operational platforms. If an entity fails to comply, VARA applies graduated enforcement mechanisms. The authority can levy financial penalties, restrict specific operations, or immediately suspend and revoke the operating license entirely. Through these strict surveillance and reporting mandates, VARA effectively deputizes licensed virtual asset service providers, forcing the firms themselves to act as the mandatory first line of defense against financial crime. Dubai resolves the tension between innovation and control by formally integrating natively digital assets into traditional civil law. The emirate treats them as legally enforceable objects or rights, making them viable within standard contractual agreements and dispute resolution. Because VARA focuses on the activity rather than the asset, firms secure deep legal certainty for their business models without regulators having to approve or ban every new iteration of token code. This rigorous, high-barrier framework is an intentional economic strategy. By filtering out opaque actors and demanding operational discipline, Dubai signals to global markets that it is a highly engineered harbor for serious institutional capital. These compliance standards also travel across borders. If an entity is licensed in Dubai but operates internationally, it must maintain VARA-level standards globally. In cases where foreign jurisdictions have lower requirements, the Dubai standard takes precedent, actively preventing regulatory arbitrage. Dubai offers the exact legal clarity that institutional virtual asset executives require to deploy capital. But the price of admission is total data visibility, strict alignment with FATF standards, and uncompromising internal governance.